Welcome to the first instalment of our Hitwise 100 Performance Analysis Report. The Hitwise 100 list from IMRG and Experian lists the top 100 e-commerce sites in the UK by traffic volume. You can download a copy of the Hitwise report from the link here. We analysed the performance of the Hitwise 100 sites and found some very interesting findings. Firstly, there's a lot of variability in the performance, with the fastest sites loading in under 2 seconds, while the slowest sites take around 10 times as long, taking over 20 seconds to load. Secondly, we looked at whether best practices for front-end performance optimization were being followed. What we found was that 73 out of the 100 sites could improve their performance by more than 30% by following the best practice. And on average, across the 100 sites, if best practices were followed around front-end performance optimization, the average improvement across all of them would be 40% reduction in page load times. And then lastly, in the report, we look at what you need to do if you want to be in the top 5%. The testing methodology we followed was to use the well-respected webpagetest.org for all measurements. We used their test machines in Gloucester and Dublin, which is geographically close to where these 100 UK sites would be hosted. We used Internet Explorer 7 browser, and we used a 1.5 megabit connection, which is fairly typical for UK broadband users. Tests were completed over a course of 2 days, and we took an average of 3 page loads, 3 first views and then 3 repeat views. Looking at the page load times for the top 50 sites here, we can see the huge variability in performance, with the fastest sites taking around 2 seconds to load and some of the slowest sites taking over 20 seconds to load. In this example, each of the boxes here represents half a second of load time. The other important thing to notice on this screen here is the amount of white boxes here to the left hand side of the picture. That shows you how long it took before something started to render to the end user within their browser. If you look at some of the better sites here, they'll start to render in about half a second, while some of the worst sites here will take maybe 5-6 seconds or even longer before something starts to render within the browser, which obviously gives the perception to the end user that the performance is even slower. The time to load the first page is indicative of what it would take for a new visitor hitting the site for the first time who hadn't visited the site before and therefore had nothing cached within the browser. This is important as it's the first impression that you make, and a slow load time here could mean the difference between winning a new customer or losing a customer to one of your competitors. What we found here was that the best site had a first page load time of around 1.6 seconds, which is very quick. The worst taking over 20 seconds to load here. If you want to be kind of Joe average, the figure there averaged across the whole 100 sites was 7.5 seconds, which actually seems quite slow. But if you want to be in the top 5th percentile, so the top 5% of websites, then 2.7 seconds or quicker is where you need to be. Next, we looked at the speed of a repeat view. So this is where you're reloading a page which you've already loaded before and therefore have some of the content cached within your browser. In this case, the timings will be lower. So in this case, the best site responded in 0.3 seconds, which is obviously very quick and gives the user the impression of a very snappy, very quick website. The worst case again was over 20 seconds, so this is a site that's not really benefiting from any kind of browser caching. It's taking almost as long to load the second time as it took to load the first time. In this example, the average figure for a repeat view was 3.7 seconds, and again, if you want to be in the top 5%, then you would need to have a page load time of 0.9 seconds or quicker. The next thing we looked at was the size of the web pages. This plays an important part of how long it takes the page to load. So obviously heavier pages will take longer, whereas a page that's smaller in size will obviously load a lot quicker. So what we found here was that the worst case pages were pretty huge. In fact, 2 megabytes in size. That's a lot of content there to download. And the best case we found was a page size of about 83k in size, which is pretty lean, really. The average was 671k, so that's more than half a megabyte. That's as an average, that figure seems quite high, and I think if you was to track this over time, you'd probably see that web pages are actually getting bigger and more bloated in size. Again, looking at the fifth percentile, which is where you want to be, it, the kind of figure there was 248 kilobytes. So if you're smaller than 248 kilobytes, then you stand a good chance of having a faster website. Next, we looked at the number of page objects. So the page objects are all the things on the page that make up the page. So things like images, style sheets, JavaScript files, Flash, Silverlight, video content, those kind of things, which make up the page. Obviously, there's a good correlation again between the number of objects and the page load time. So the more things you have on the page, then the longer typically it would take to load. So what we found was that the best case was a page with just 13 objects on there, and that would load pretty quickly. The worst case was a page with 169 objects, so that means 169 HTTP requests to download that whole page, so that would be a very slow page there to load. The average we found across the 100 was 78 objects per page, which again is quite high. And where you really want to be, if you want to be up there in the top 5%, is to have a page with less than 21 objects on the page. So to summarise, where you would need to be if you wanted to be in the top 5% of UK e-retail sites, you would need to have a first page load time of less than 2.7 seconds. You'd need a repeat view of less than 0.9 seconds. Page sizes, if you aim to keep those smaller than about 248k in size, that will obviously give you a good chance of the page loading faster. And then the number of objects on the page, if you can keep that as small as possible, but less than 21 would give you a good chance of being up there in the top 5%. Just a quick reminder about why page load times are so important. Page load times can be correlated with the revenue generated by a website, particularly for e-commerce sites like the Hitwise 100. I'm not going to go through all these examples, you can find references to these out on the internet, but just to pick the top one, for example, Shopzilla in 2009 improved the speed of their website, and the net result of that was a 7 to 12% increase in their revenues. Finally, we looked at where best practices being applied across the 100 sites. Best practices can be found through tools like Yahoo's YSlow and Google PageSpeed, which will rank your site against all these kind of best practice optimizations. The best practice optimizations you can then apply either manually, which may be cost effective for you depending on your site, or it may be better to look at an automated solution like Optimize, which can automatically apply these best practices without you having to make any code changes to your application. What we found was that if you were to apply all these best practices to these websites, that 73%, so that's 73 out of the 100 Hitwise sites, could get more than 30% reduction in the page load times if they were to follow these best practices. When we looked across the whole 100, what we found was that the average reduction for a first view could be over 40%. So that's taking you from an average of 7.5 seconds per page view down to 4.4 seconds. And the average improvement you could get for repeat views would be over 70% by following best practice. So that would be taking a repeat view from an average of 3.7 all the way down to 1.1 seconds. If you'd like to download a copy of this report, then you can head to applicationperformance.com/hitwise. There you'll also find that you can sign up for quarterly updates to this report. If you want to contact us, head over to our contact page and we can discuss how we can help you improve your site performance. Thank you for listening.